These students skipping out of school, they don't know the first thing about guns. Let's not complain about them. Let's teach them about guns. This is an opportunity. We'll talk about it when Freedom returns at 5.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, and well, let's get right to it. We're pleased to be joined by our friend Victor Davis Hanson, noted historian, Hoover Institution scholar, writes at National Review as well. His new book, The Second World War, is how the first global conflict was fought and won. But in addition to that new book you should pick up, he is featured prominently in a new one-hour documentary called The Price of Peace, which examines deterrence and appeasement as a means of avoiding war. It's going to be on PBS stations around the country. In Chicago on WTTW, it will air on Sunday, April 8th at 2 o'clock. And Victor Davis Hanson, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about the documentary before we get kind of into pay it forward to modern context. The lessons from 20th century history about appeasement, for example, that Neville Chamberlain is not the approach that we should model, right? Weakness is provocative?
Yeah, even more disturbingly, the appeaser is always praised for his short-term solution, which only magnifies a long-term challenge. And the person who believes in deterrence is usually ridiculed or demonized as somebody who likes war, when in fact addressing a short-term aggressor before that they can grow into an existential threat is really the more humane course, but human nature being what it is. We seem to demonize deterrence, and we sort of romanticize appeasement. And deterrence is just the expansion of the way you and I and everybody work in the real world, the way that we treat people, the way that keeps people honest, the reason people don't speed at a high dangerous speed through a red light. And that idea that people will do certain people will do dangerous things in our daily lives is expanded to the world form, which is just nations are just collections of individuals.
So let me I'll ask this question then again. 20th century lessons that are applicable today. The appeasement one is a good dichotomy you just presented. Like George Kennan's policy of containment versus Ronald Reagan's updating of it with mutually assured destruction. When we're talking about threats from rogue nations like North Korea, Iran, should we be kind of containing their Russian revanchism? Should we be trying to contain their expansionist tendencies, the threats they pose, or should we be more actively engaged in proactive backing them down like Reagan did with the Soviet Union?
Well, I think that it's usually wiser. You don't have to be preemptory like we did with Saddam Hussein. You can, but I don't think that's necessary with North Korea. When you look at systems that threaten us, but they're internally unstable, then I think it's sort of like taking a little hammer to an eggshell and just tapping all the time, but be internally vigilant. And so in the case of North Korea, that's not a sustainable system without Chinese and Russian subsidies or Iranian trade or whatever the mechanism for foreign exchange. So I think these latest rounds of sanctions, to the degree that we can stop China and Russia from cheating, have really had an effect. And I think that's why Kim Jong-un is willing to talk to Trump. He's got to be very careful not to give up because, as you know, in the past, every time whether the six-party talks or the Clinton or Bush administrations, just when we thought that they were at the in extremis and they were going to give us some concessions, we rushed in aid, or the South Koreans gave them billions of dollars, and they expect that. So we're going to have to be pretty tough because I think the media and the world's quote-unquote community within the next 3 or 4 months is going to have graphic stories of how children are suffering in North Korea, and they may well be, but compared to the specter of a nuclear exchange, it's going to be a terrible but tolerable price to pay if we can denuclearize North Korea.
Well, what do you think about President Trump meeting with Kim Jong-un? Do you think it's too soon, or once you meet and it doesn't work out, what's next? What's left?
Well, I think that's behind the Pompeo pitch. If you look at the people around him now, Mattis, McMaster, Pompeo, Haley, they're really the best thinkers that this country can offer, and they're realists, and they're all proponents of deterrence. So it's not just Trump talking to Kim Jong-un. And there's a price to pay because he's giving him credits through photo ops and everything. But if he can make it clear that he's an unpredictable in person as he is in the media, and that there's not going to be a discussion about the nuclear status of North Korea, it's going to have to denuclearize. It'll be worth it. And I think he's going to tell him some things that we really haven't heard in the media, that Japan or South Korea or even Taiwan might consider going nuclear if he persists. And there's a lot of things that we can do that we haven't done short of war with North Korea. Everything from questioning why we're still giving student visas as Chinese nationals to upping missile defense at even a greater degree in that area. And again, the ultimate lever that we have against China is allowing those countries to go nuclear if North Korea will not denuclearize, and that terrifies China.
I wanted to get your take on sort of a geopolitical threat, but a domestic political threat to Trump's presidency, and that's the ongoing Mueller investigation. Inspector General report from the FBI recommends that Andy McCabe, the former deputy director, be terminated before he retires. You've got real questions about the Russian meddling in the election and what the Obama administration that knew those in the Obama administration that knew about it, what they tried to do about it. Susan Rice, according to a new book by, frankly, a couple of lefties, David Korn and Michael Isikoff, suggests that Susan Rice gave a stand-down order to deal with Russian meddling in the 2016 election. There's also questions about Russian connections to the information that was cobbled together for the Steele dossier that the FBI ultimately used to get the surveillance on the Carter Page and so on and so forth. I mean, is there anything left to this Russian collusion narrative that the Democrats and their handmaidens in the D.C. press corps have been pushing?
I think there is. There's one, and now we're starting to see what the kernel of the whole hysteria was, that when the Obama administration left office, there was a lot of legal exposure on the part of Ben Rhodes, Susan Rice, Samantha Power for looking at surveillance, unmasking, and leaking them, which are felonies. The entire DOJ was compromised, whether it was Bruce Orr, who didn't fill out the fact on a federal form that his wife was working with a opposition research during the election. And we had the FBI, McCabe's wife was running for office, getting Clinton money. We don't quite know what Strzok is doing. I imagine we're going to hear a lot more about the way that he interviewed Cheryl Mills and Huma Abedin. And so I think we're going to start to see this whole thing was, if we could use that psychological term, a form of projection, because there's things there that Mueller has to deal with that he hasn't, and that is, if you lie to an FBI person, as he alleges that Flynn did, what happens to Abedin, or what happens to Mills that we know lied, and what happens to Steele that we know lied to his FBI handlers? If you say that you have to be transparent, you can't mislead a federal official, what about McCabe, and what about Comey, and what about DOJ people that misled a FISA court and didn't tell them the real nature of that dossier? And if you're meddling in an election and you're going to indict a Russian that can't be really extradited, what about Steele, who was a foreign national, did not register as a foreign agent, and can be extradited, and yet we don't see any felony indictments against him down the road? So there's an inequality under the law that's going to, I think it's starting to box Mueller in, and that's why if you look at the op-eds of the Washington Post, New York Times, a lot of the never-Trumpers, if you notice, there's a sort of a hysteria now. There's just furor. Some of it's directed at Devin Nunes for bringing a lot of this to our attention, but I don't think there was any there other than go after Carter Page, go after Papadopoulos, go after this minor, and then show the world that when the real stuff comes out, that there were legitimate reasons to investigate when there wasn't. And so I think it's sort of a smokescreen. And Carter Page was a nobody, but the real issue was he was useful to surveil American citizens, unmask them, leak them, and get that information out before the election.
Well, do you think Mueller's investigation is going to be winding up soon?
I think it's going to follow the Scooter Libby paradigm, that we're going to get a lot of low-level people or we're going to get threats of perjury or lying to an FBI agent, and then there's going to be what we've seen with Papadopoulos and Carter Page and Manafort. And I think Flynn will be, I think his confession will be withdrawn because that poison tree FISA court order is going to affect a lot of people. That if they're using surveillance text and then they're going and interviewing people and they're trying to collate them for inconsistencies, but the surveilled text itself was gotten through improper means, I think a lot of that's going to be thrown out. But I think Mueller's got a real problem because if you look at his team, whether it's Page and Strzok, or you look at Rhee, who was a big donor to Clinton, and she also defended the Clinton Foundation, and she's on the team, and she was defended Ben Rhodes. And we have another lawyer in the team that defended the guy who destroyed the mobile devices of Hillary Clinton. And there's so much conflict of interest. We have 4 people that came right out of his own law firm. And I think the Inspector General is going to ask themselves, why, when you were in a very politically charged atmosphere, did you get this team of 12 or 13 people that the left went hysterically giddy over? The Dream Team, the A-Team, the Army. And when you look at individual people on that team, a lot of them have departed, or people in the it's been a wreckage. The Orrs are compromised. McCabe is compromised. Rod Rosenstein is probably going to be compromised because he signed one of the FISA orders. Rebecca's gone. Miller's gone. So there's a lot of people there that just aren't there in the FBI or the DOJ or Mueller's team. Mueller didn't tell us why he released Page and Strzok. It was very weird. All of a sudden, we were told last summer they had gone, and they were caught by the Inspector General at the same time, but he staggered the departure announcements as if they were rotated in a normal fashion. That was really disingenuous of him. We didn't find that out for 4 months, that they had communicated in a way that showed they were both partisan, and that McCabe, in some fashion with this term insurance, were working on ways to subvert either the transition or the presidency. And I think Mueller, if he was going to be transparent, should have said, I've had to let this person go and this person go, and this is why, and he never did that. It had to leak out.
He is Victor Davis Hanson. He at National Review. Catch his work, senior fellow at the Hoover Institute. The new book, The Second World War is How the First Global Conflict Was Fought and Won. And again, don't forget this documentary coming up where his analysis is featured prominently. The Price of Peace, which will air on TTW Channel 11 here in Chicago, Sunday, April 8th at 2 p.m. ThePriceOfPeaceFilm.com is the website. Victor Davis Hanson, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.